Hello and welcome to the Memory Capsule podcast, where we interview members of the Pokemon TCG community. My name is Rafal Gladys. Each week, we'll be speaking with our guests about their background with the Pokemon TCG, how they got involved with the game, and giving them an opportunity to share their love of the game. Today's guest is Aneil Saini. Aneil has played the game on and off for over a decade, returning the past few years without missing a step, placing top 16 at two regionals with Mew Vmax, as well as top 16 at LAIC with an innovative Turbo Miraidon list. Aneil has shown that he is among the best players from the competitive Toronto area. Aneil is also one of the hosts of the Shift Gear podcast. How you doing, Aneil?
Good, man. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
I'm doing good. I'm happy to have you on. Is there anything I might have missed in your introduction or gotten wrong that you might want to add for
N-
players who are listening?
No, man, you painted me out to be probably a lot better than I actually sound, so I'll take it.
Yeah, we can dive more. You can tell us all about your achievements.
No complaints from me, dude.
All right. So I'm just gonna start off by asking the question I ask every single guest. What is your favorite card of all time and why?
My favorite card of all time happens to be my V-Star marker. So I've played in a lot of tournaments at this point. So a lot of people, I've met a lot of people, and a lot of people have commented on it almost every game I sit down. Luxray GL Level X, reprinted in Celebrations. A lot of you will be familiar with it just from that, but that was my first true love, so to speak. I was too broke to afford it at the time. The card was $120 when I was maybe 10 or 11 years old, so that was out of the question. But it was the BDIF great deck, and then I eventually traded for it, and I remember exactly where I was when I traded for it, and it's just been iconic to me ever since. So I still have my original. I still use it all the time in my Lux Chomp deck. So that is my favorite card of all time.
Nice. Yeah, I got into the game just like a couple years after that. I think I started in like 2011. It was like right after like 2011 Worlds. So that card had like
Hmm.
rotated maybe like half a year to a year ago. But I just remember like I would look at old like Six Prizes articles and just hear all these like horror stories about the price of that card and Garchomp, and I was like, oh god. Um,
Oh yeah,
so now that we've like kind of established ourselves as Poke Boomers,
for real.
tell us about how you kind of started playing the game.
Yeah, I'm a real pokey boomer. I won't even lie. If you've ever seen my podcast, you know that because I talk about it all the time, and I'm probably more proud of it than I should be. But um, yeah, I've been playing for oh man, 15, 16 years now. It's been a minute. I started in 2008 or 2009, somewhere around there. I got into the game just as like most kids, like just on the playgrounds at recess. Kids were super into it. And I'd gone through the fads before. Like I collected Yu-Gi-Oh, and a big thing around me was hockey cards, and I still to this day still really enjoy hockey cards. So I guess one of them stuck with me. But for the most part, the fads kind of came and went for me. But Pokemon always stuck, and I got really into it. The competitive side really intrigued me when I first started, and I thought it was pretty cool just knowing that the cards that my parents or my grandparents were buying for me actually had like some sort of utility was really intriguing to me. And so I got into it. I started looking things up. I eventually stumbled upon a pre-release, to which I went to, and then they told me about League, and I thought League was like this huge thing. And I know League's not really a huge thing anymore, but that was kind of the only way to play the game back then. So I would go to this weekly league, 12 o'clock Sundays. It was the only time, like this was before PTCGO, PTCG Live, like the only time you can really play with people. I thought it was this super serious thing. I came with like a deck list printed out, like fresh sleeves, fresh everything. And I got there and the guy's like, dude, you don't need to do all that. Like, we're just chilling. So fell in love with the game kind of right then and there. And ever since then, never looked back.
Nice. Yeah, I was gonna ask, like, were you then like one of like the weird kids on the playground who actually knew how to like the game functioned? Because like I feel like everyone collected it as a kid, but no one ever knew what they were doing.
Yeah, at that point in time, I would say I was actually less involved with the game than most kids. I didn't really care about it, and I kind of pursued this in secret, so to speak. And all ever like I grew up not telling anybody about Pokemon, like up until even like 2, 3 years ago. I wouldn't tell anybody about it. Like the first, I think first like 5, 6 months of my girlfriend and I dating, like we've been together like now like 5.5 years, but first 5, 6 months I didn't even tell her about it. Like I'd travel to these like random ass places, and I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm going to Columbus, Ohio. And she's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, yeah, I got a buddy out there. And it was just so sus. The whole thing was so sus because I just like was not into this whole like Pokemon is a mainstream thing. And to be honest, like, and sorry, I'm dragging out this answer a bit, but the way that Pokemon is perceived now is completely different to the way it was perceived 5 years ago. Ever since the pandemic. So like, yeah, that was kind of the idea there. Like, I didn't tell anybody about anything, and like, there were a couple times where a couple guys at school like found it through a wormhole or whatever. Like, I had a couple guys that played Pokemon as well at the same high school, and we kind of just shot the rumor down like instantly. So it wasn't cool. So like, I wasn't really, and like, I'm a big sports guy as well, and like being in like locker rooms and stuff growing up and stuff like that is not a welcome thing to bring up. So I was very secretive about it.
Yeah. Yeah, now we have, juniors and seniors making like our salaries in a year.
Oh yeah,
Off their Pokemon
yeah.
things like good, I mean, good for them. Like, I'm glad the game is as big as it is now.
hmm Yeah, 100%.
So then, what was kind of your first like big competitive event? You said you were like going to leagues, just kind of picking up the game. At what point did you start being like, trying to actually like compete a little bit?
Yeah, I actually won my first tournament that I entered, which definitely helped. I was in seniors at the time. I played like some like Kingdra Prime, a champ, some I don't know, some jank. It wasn't good, but I actually won the first tournament I entered, so that helped a ton for sure. Because I had been pretty, I don't, I definitely wasn't good at the game, but I was well versed. I would say, like, I kind of knew what I was doing. So, I won my first tournament, and this was in like 2008, 2009. I guess actually no, there were primes, so maybe it was a bit after that. Anyways, um, and so then after that, I learned about Toronto regionals. Toronto always had a regionals, and Canadian nationals historically was also in Toronto. This was also at the time where we had a thing called provincials, which was the equivalent of states in the U.S., obviously, which occurred like I don't want to say once in every province because it definitely didn't touch like the northern provinces, but once in most provinces. So we had a lot of exposure in the Toronto area. Like there was a lot of like avenues to kind of play. So I think it was 2010 would be my first like big tournament, and I don't think I did too well there. My first like coming out party, so to speak, was in 2011 when I did, I think I top eighted like a regionals or something in Toronto. So that was like my first kind of taste of it, and then my first Worlds was in 2013. So I wasn't really competitive until the 2013 season. Like I didn't really care about Worlds, none of that. There was also a different system to how you qualified for Worlds. Like it was an ELO based system, which is you look back on it now, you're like, oh man. But it made qualifying a lot harder back then. So in 2013, I think I met Kieran in 2011. We had a couple other buddies in the scene as well, and then Kieran and I became testing buddies, and we both went for it in 2013, and that was a good year for sure.
Yeah, were you in masters at that point, or was it still seniors?
That was my last year of seniors, and then Kieran and I both top four nationals that year. So that the only way I could have made it at that point was to top four nationals. So we got her done, and then we went to Worlds, and that kind of catapulted everything.
Nice. I've always been jealous of the players who got to play a few years in seniors.
Yeah.
My first year playing was also, I think it was just like would have been my first year in masters. So, I'm out here like playing against like Jason K at our locals in Chicago.
Oh yeah.
Oh, this is terrible. I have no clue what I'm doing. Um, do you have like a most memorable season, especially like early on, that stands out to you?
Definitely that 2013 one for me. That was our first like real kind of experience, and that was crazy. Just because like I had no expectation on going to Worlds at all, and we did really well at nationals. I still have the trophy behind me right now. Like it's always gonna be memorable to me. Like at the time, like it sounds a lot better than it probably was. Like there's probably like 30 people in the whole tournament, so like top four sounds like oh wow, top four national, that's pretty sick. But really, it wasn't all that cool. But just the way it kind of happened, like day one was its own thing, and then day two, walking into day two, I knew I needed to win my top eight match to get to Worlds, and that was like an insurmountable amount of pressure that I felt in that moment. And I think what makes it the most memorable for me was the fact that I sat there in my top eight match, knowing this is kind of do or die for me. I was in like a 30-70 matchup, not feeling too great about it, but after getting over that hump, like it gave me confidence, like almost for the rest of my life, so to speak, in all facets of my life, whether it was in Pokemon or mostly in sports. And I know we're going to touch on that later, but it gave me a lot of confidence going around for the rest of my life, just that one round of Pokemon. So that was definitely the most memorable for me. And then Worlds was in Vancouver that year, so I got to go with my dad, which was pretty cool. And yeah, it was awesome, dude. It was awesome.
Yeah. What was the deck you were playing, like this, like the 3070? How did you like prepare for that event? What were you playing, and how did you like know what you were up against?
Yeah, it's actually pretty funny because I had Curtis Lyon on Shift Gear a couple weeks ago, and he was the guy.
That was a good episode.
Yeah, I loved recording that. It was so fun to just talk to him about like retro format Pokemon and stuff. But I mentioned for a bit there that I I actually bought my deck list off some dude. Some dude in the States did well with it, and I needed my Worlds invite. And so he posted on Facebook, and I was like, what's the worst that could happen? So my 15-year-old dumbass PayPal'd this guy 25 US dollars for his list. And it was a TDK list. Thunderous Deoxys Curum, for those who aren't familiar, which was a team plasma list. None of the cards are really prevalent to this day. Like none of them got reprinted in Celebrations, so you may not know too much about them. Like for the general audience, I know you obviously know Rafal, but basically the deck was just like like a past day future box, like almost the exact same concept, except replaced Miraidon for a Curum that could like basically one shot everything. So it had a one prize option, had some two prize options, but the matchup was into Plasma Clang, which was a Kling Klang, which is ironically where the Shift Gear podcast name comes from. The Kling Klang had an ability called Shift Gear that moved energies around freely around the board, and then there was a Plasma Kling Klang that had the ability prevent all damage done to your metal Pokemon by other Team Plasma Pokemon. Or I think it was special energies on them. Or I don't know. There's some sort of like caveat. Basically walls out my whole deck. Yeah. So it was a little dodgy to say the least. It was best of three, top eight, and I was against Alan Zhu actually, funnily enough. So he's still prevalent on the scene today. And I basically just ran him over. Like I went as fast as I could with my Curums and stuff. Like I don't remember too well. It was 11 years ago, but somehow we overcame that matchup, and then I hit it again in top four, which was no fun.
Yeah, I just looked it up. It's all damage to metal Pokemon from your opponent's EXs.
And Curum's weak to metal, so it made it really, really difficult because Cobalion EX was often one-shotting it and stuff like that. But so at the time, like my main testing partner was Kieran, and he literally just one-tricked that deck. He was one-tricking it, so I had played over 100 games into that matchup, so I kind of knew what I was doing enough to win that top eight against someone who hadn't like practiced too much against my matchup. But then I hit Kieran in top four. I took a game off him, but then I believe I bricked in game three, and we didn't care, dude. Like at that point, like we were like just having fun. We were on stream. We were having the time of our lives. So it was all good to lose in top four against that matchup. I would take that trade off any day.
For sure. Um, Now I did want to ask you, like, you've played with these different systems now. Like we've both played with like states, nationals, and now we have it's all just like regionals and ICs and like the league cup system and stuff. Um, do you see any like kind of like likes and dislikes between these different systems? Is there anything you'd want to maybe be brought back from back then? Is there anything you wish we had back then that we do now? What are kind of the big differences you see between the systems we have now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually think the system right now is quite well balanced. I think there's a lot of people are gonna have gripes with it. Like no matter what in the modern day, like people will have gripes with just about anything. They will always find a way to complain. And I think that's a bigger topic, but that's one of my biggest like issues with the community as a whole at the moment. Just like feels like it's just no one's ever happy, and it's just I don't know. It's kind of exhausting sometimes, right? Like as a you're also like a free flowing, like easygoing human being. Like you kind of know where it's like where I'm coming from in the sense where it's just like just be happy, man. Like we don't need to complain about everything. But yeah, I actually think the modern day system is actually quite healthy. I would love to see the return of provincials and states and stuff like that. Like that'd be pretty awesome. Or the return of national championships, even where you're restricted. And we've talked about this a little bit on our podcast too. But where you're like restricted to only playing in your own country's national championship, and you kind of get that sense of national pride, which would be awesome. At least for Canadians, I think we feel that one a little bit more than Americans because in America, obviously, you guys have a huge player base, so it's not as like competitive, like concentrated competitive, so to speak. Like all of our players are more or less in either Vancouver or Toronto. There's a handful outside of those cities, but like our pride of being the best player in Canada would be like probably hugely toxic to be honest. Like it would get pretty rowdy, but that would be awesome just to play with those stakes again.
For sure. I think just thinking back now that it's like coming back to me, one of the big differences though is that like I think back then it would be like regionals were just weighted a bit differently because we also had states.
Yeah.
So like you would have, instead of like a regional every other week, you'd have like spring regionals. And it would be like one regional in the south, one regional in the west, one regional in the Midwest, one regional in the Northeast, all on the same weekend, like one
Right.
quarter basically. And then you had your states, in every state throughout the year. So I think that would be a little bit interesting. People having to kind of pick and choose your regionals, instead of everyone kind of converging onto one. I don't know if that would be better or worse, but it's definitely a lot different than how we have it now.
Yeah, for sure. I like I've also experimented in my mind with the idea of like a soft cap of how many regionals you can attend and at what time. So I actually really like that idea as well.
Hmm. Um, so then I know you said that you kind of took like a bit of like a hiatus from the game. Like what it kind of then is like the time range for which you played the game.
Yeah, it's my memory's not great. So like I've been trying to figure this out actually. And I don't actually know, but I know I started around 2008, 2009, somewhere in there. Played fully until 2013. And then my first year in Masters was 2014, and I remember taking a break a little bit that year just as I don't remember what happened. I believe I like bubbled out of a top 8 or something at one point. I think I finished ninth at Toronto Regionals that year in Masters, my first year Masters, and that was like pretty demotivating at that time. And I was just a kid, so I didn't really know what the hell was going on. So I just played the big tournaments that year. I was like, let's just not fully commit. And then they actually had an auto invite for top 4 nationals that year. So if you got top 4 nationals, you get an auto invite to Worlds. So I just missed out on that. That felt kind of bad. And then 2015, I didn't play the game all year. I remember playing like a couple of big tournaments, but that was it. No locals, nothing. And then I actually top 4 nationals that year in 2015 as a master. And in that year, they actually got rid of the invite auto invite to Worlds that year in 2015. And I believe I missed my invite by like 50 CP or like 20 CP, even though I didn't play like the whole year. So that was a big blow to me as a competitive player. The prizing wasn't too great at that time either, so it was kind of tough to find motivation to play the game. I believe I got like 3 boxes, a trophy, and a top 8 mat for top 4 nationals, which like felt okay, but I mean, like cards weren't worth too much at that time besides Shaman EX, so I wasn't like too motivated to keep playing the game. And then I kind of just grew up. So in 2016 I believe I was in grade 12 at that time, just going into university, and life was a bit hectic. I was taking soccer a lot more seriously. Was playing rep at that time. I was playing rep through almost my entire time playing Pokemon, but it's at that age where it really starts to get serious because there's potential to do some big things. And then my first year in university was also 2016, so between 2016, 2018, probably up to 2019, I barely touched the game. Just going through university, having all those changes in your life as well, and you're kind of learning a lot about yourself at that point in time as well. So I had a lot of stuff going on. Didn't really touch the game too much. Wasn't really into the formats either. Like the X and Y block to me is like a whole just fever dream. Like I don't even remember any of it because I didn't like the direction the game was going. And still to this day, to be honest, like I go back and I play those formats. I actually have them built in the 2016, 2017 era. And I hate it, man. I hate that format of Pokemon. So that was part of the reason why I kind of took a break. So I was on break till 2019. Came back, played some locals, shot for my invite that year, and then obviously, sorry, I believe it was 2020. I shot for my invite. So like the end of 2019 versus the start of 2020. So like September on, that was my first year back, like trying to actually go for my invite.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think you and I are just like a year or two off from each other because like I went to like 2015 nationals after barely playing that season. I might have just done VGC nationals that,
Hmm.
and then I just like stopped for the whole time I was in college. Came back after Worlds 2019. No longer in a part of the country where there's just like no card game stuff going on.
Yeah.
Back in Chicago where it's very competitive. And kind of being like, oh, this thing I used to be really into. Like, what's up with this now? You know,
Hmm.
I think the first event I watched when I got back to the game was Worlds 2019, and it was like the Henry Brand versus Shintaro finals, and I was like, oh, Blounds looks so cool. Let's kind of start getting back into this. Like, what was your experience of getting back in the game and kind of figuring out from scratch. Because one of the big things I've noticed with like improving at the game and also for new players is like, just the longer you play, the more just like memory you have of this used to be good, this might be good now, oh, this is how this was played a year ago, it's played differently now, like things like that. Like, and coming in just with no knowledge of like anything that's been played, anything that's been meta for 4 or 5 years can be a bit of like a shock to the system. Like it feels like I kind of have to start from scratch. What was that like for you?
Yeah, definitely feels like it. And like this is something I tell a lot of my friends that I've met kind of post pandemic that are newer players. Going back and playing old formats might not be like the sexiest idea, so to speak. Like when it comes to being a player who's only known the modern format, like it doesn't really appeal to you. Like, oh, old format, oh, sick, boomers. But it actually has a lot of benefit to know how like the game used to work. And a lot of the mechanics, as you touched on, are reused. Like almost all of them are reused at some point. Like the game's been around long enough that they're all reused at some point. So having this knowledge of all these past formats, like it really comes back to kind of circle around to make you better in current format. So my moment of kind of coming back in was in, I believe it was the end of 2019. And like my dates are probably off a little bit, but whenever Zorark and Lele were kind of like big, I remember buying a couple Lele's off some guy in Waterloo or whatever, and like I know Kieran was trying to get back into it. He never really like fell off. He was kind of doing his thing the whole time. But I had a couple other buddies from outside who were starting to get into it. So I was like, okay, cool. Like let's play a little bit. And I just really enjoyed the game. I really enjoyed the GX era. Like Zora Rock was my deck. I think I won like 4 cups with it or something. Like I really got back in. I just dove head first, and I felt really comfortable. And to be honest, like my whole Pokemon career up until I quit for the first time in 2015 or 16 or whatever it was, my whole career was just kind of like fluke one-ofs. Like I was not a consistently good player. And even up until like 2022, I would still argue I was not a consistently good player because I would find these archetypes that were kind of under the radar. Like my 2015 Nationals list was on Six Prizes listed as one of the worst decks to ever top four Nationals. And I agree, it was terrible. And I would like kind of build my entire like career off of just finding like random archetypes and catching people off guard and doing well with it like that. And that's literally what my nationals list was. And it was awful, man. Like a bunch of 1/1 lines, like there's one Landorus, like one Lucario, like the deck just sucked. And as a whole, like my career was just that. It was just like there was no like consistent good play behind it, at least up to my own standards. I didn't feel like I was putting out anything really noteworthy. So seeing that success when I started to come back in 2019, 2020, like that was really motivating to me and saying like, oh, okay, I can actually ball. And I think my brain as well matured a lot like throughout that time that I was off. I got a lot of time just to chill and focus on schooling and stuff like that. And like I was able to be a sharper mind when I got back. So that was really motivating for me, and that kind of pushed me to kind of get back in the game.
For sure. And we can kind of maybe bounce back to this later as well. But you mentioned you did a lot of things with like sports, athletics. I know you work with like athletics right now at the University of Toronto. Like,
hmm
have you seen that impact your ability to play card games and kind of the mindset you have? And do you maybe see anything from TCG impact your athletic abilities?
Absolutely, yeah. Like what I was touching on in 2013, just getting over that hump of top eight, like that was huge for me. And even until 2020, like I don't want to say a serial loser, but like I had a lot of trouble mentally getting over humps. So I would play unbelievably the whole season, whatever. Like I was in my bag, and then a final would hit or like a pressure situation would hit, and for some reason, like I wasn't able to get my mind over that hump. Like everything just felt kind of heavy. Like whether I was playing soccer or hockey, like those were my two sports, but I also played like a lot of tennis, a lot of stuff like that. Like when I was in pressure situations, my body just felt heavy and I wasn't really able to get over that hump. But then coming back to Pokemon actually really helped me with that. And so I was in school at the University of Toronto between 2016 and 2021. So I was working part time, but at the university with the athletic program, whatever. Wasn't as serious as it was in 2022 and on. but I also played on the school's, like, so to speak, varsity teams for soccer. So that was my big gig, and through that and through like losing over and over and over, like it really brought me to understand the connection between the two. And when I got over that hump in 2013, I felt an immediate increase to my confidence. So that's something that really like has come full circle, and it's really connected the two. And I find that now when I'm in those situations, like I've just historically gotten kind of unlucky in my top 8 win-and-ins in Pokemon, unfortunately, recently. But like win-and-ins to day 2, like my conversion rate is quite high, and stuff like that. Like I love those situations now, and it's all because I kind of went through the gutter of losing over and over and over and not being able to get over that hump. And there is a huge connection to the two. And I'm a coach now at the University of Toronto. Like obviously I don't play there anymore, but I coach the men's soccer team, and a lot of my ideals and a lot of what I preach to both my soccer like kids that I coach, and as well as like even in Pokemon coaching, like a lot of those ideals remain the same. Like the things that I kind of learned, like the main lesson I think I learned in those moments is the game is still the same. Whether it's round 1, round 9, whether it's the finals or the first game of the season, like the game is still the same. And understanding that the game is the same is the hardest part sometimes. And you see so many athletes and so many Pokemon players choke up in those situations. And a lot of it just because they were feeling what I was feeling. Like when I had no confidence, like they were feeling the same thing. Like it feels like your body's just heavy, stuff like that. So just teaching yourself how to motivate yourself is something that I still convey onto others, and I use every day.
That's really amazing. I mean, is there anything in particular you'd like suggest to players who are still working on, whether it's like, doing well at a day 2 or something as simple as like I'm a newer player, I want to win my first challenge, top 8 a cup,
Hmm.
start going positive at like a regional, something like that, and getting over that hump. Like, what do you say to players other than just like simply improving at the game? What can they do with like the mental aspect that can help them?
So the most important thing mentally, and what I teach all the people that I coach, is the most important thing mentally is to not be mental, like to literally just be robotic. I find that that helps me the most. So and what kind of brings that up is reps with your deck, or reps doing like similar sequencing to what you're doing at that time. So if you basically just kind of automize everything that you do, you're not going to be your nerves aren't really going to be a factor. So the big thing for me is like if I'm going into a big tournament, like I'll use LAIC for an example. I'd been playing like Miraidon for a while going into that tournament, and so all this little sequencing things that, and I mean, like Murata's not the most skill intensive deck in the world. Obviously, that's no secret. But there are a lot of things, at least with that build that I made, that were really really important to get the sequencing correct. And I had done it so many times that it was kind of just muscle memory for me. And even when I was in the most pressurized of situations, I was able to calm myself down because I knew exactly what I was doing. So for people trying to get over that hump, like you want to win your first challenge, you want to win your first cup, you want to go positive, the most important thing to do, and what I always teach, is just be a one trick. Like pick one thing and get really, really good at it to the point where you don't need to think about it anymore. And you'll find you'll get results a lot faster than people who kind of like bounce around and play to that mental aspect. When you take out the mental aspect and you make sure that everything is kind of to your muscle memory, you'll find you'll get results a lot faster.
Yeah, and I think I would 100% agree to that. Like, I can attest to that. Like, this has definitely been my most successful season so far.
Hmm.
Played, and a lot of that is because every new set, I either stick with the same deck I've played before, or eventually land on one that I just want to play in, versus like picking a different deck every single cup and challenge I would go to, which is what I did my first season back, which I think at some level some players have to do that. Like my first season back, like I didn't know what a lot of the decks were, so I was like, well, I'll try out Pikarom, I'll try out Rechizard, I'll try out Mewtwo, Mew, just because I didn't know what they did. Because sometimes,
Yeah,
learning how to beat a deck, it's good to play that deck so you know how it functions and you know how it runs. But I think it comes to a certain point where it is, you get a lot of mileage out of just getting really, really good at what you like to play.
absolutely. Yeah, 100%. I think there's a lot to do as well with just the idea of like similar concepts, like I touched on earlier with like decks and stuff like that. Like it's about reps, obviously, but it's more about meaningful reps. It's more about the times that you're playing the game and you're not just playing to play. Like you're playing and you're actively like taking in what you're doing, and sometimes self-reflecting. And I'm guilty of this a lot, where I'll be testing for a tournament or whatever, and I'll put in like however many hours of just like meaningless gameplay, like just going on ladder and just like, oh, okay, I donked this guy sick, like I'm doing well for myself. I've come to realize that like there's a lot of like self reflection that you need to have to really like narrow down where your mistakes are and how to grow as a player while playing that deck. So sometimes adversity is the best thing in the world. You need to go to tournaments. You need to kind of just get kicked in the butt a bunch of times until you really pick up what you're doing wrong, and then after that, it's kind of smooth sailing. So I think adding meaningful reps is really important as well for players who are just kind of starting to learn how their mind works and stuff. Is just like don't blindly just keep playing and take some time to reflect and on what you may have done wrong and make sure you don't do it again.
For sure. And when it comes to things like practicing for events, like what is kind of your process? Like how much of it is testing online, testing versus friends, just kind of the mental aspect of thinking through matchups, especially due to the fact that, like you said yourself, sometimes you played some wacky decks. Like what goes for like picking a deck and preparing for an event and knowing how you're gonna get the result you want.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people answer this question differently. And I think I don't know, I've been around the game for a long time. You've been around the game for a long time. I still don't think I have it figured out. You can be around the game for as long as you want, but unless you have something that like consistently works for you over and over and over, it's hard to have a concise like kind of conclusion to that question. I think a lot of people have like their methods. They have things that kind of work for them, kind of, but I don't think a 100% foolproof method really exists for anybody. Just as the game changes as well, like the way I would have prepared 10 years ago versus the way I prepare now is completely different because now I can effectively do nothing until the day before the tournament and then go on Limitless and just sneak out some guy's list that did well at a late night and still do okay with it, right? Like as long as you know the how to play your deck fundamentally, your list and how you're kind of refining it doesn't go through the same steps that it used to. Like you used to have to refine your own lists. Like there was a lot of differences in how the game kind of went. As far as like unorthodox picks and why I choose to go down that route, a lot of the time I find that I have my best successes when I'm playing a deck that people don't really expect or people don't really know how to play against. And in the age of modern Pokemon where everything is digitized, everything is available, everything is like refined to a really good standard. I know that if I walk into, I don't know, let's say Indianapolis Regionals with Charizard, everybody and their mom has a game plan for me. Everyone. Whereas if I walk in there with Dialga, and obviously Hedrick won that tournament with Dialga, so that kind of changed everything. But at the time, that's just a meme deck. Like even the Friday before Indianapolis, Dialga was still a meme deck. There was nobody really seriously like taking it too serious at that time. But when I walk in with decks like that, like people don't know how to play against it. People don't even know what it does. And I find that if I'm able to create my brand, especially now with the podcast and stuff, if I'm able to create my brand as somebody who can get to worlds with those kinds of decks, I think that's worth a lot more value to me as well. Just to have a personal brand and stuff centered around that than it would be if I was just like a Zard bot who was like just carving out top 64s. And of course, I would love to do really well. I'd love to win a ton of money, stuff like that. And I just don't think a lot of the time that I'm better than 99% of other Zard players. I don't have the time at this point of my life to put in that amount of time to be better than 99% of Zard players. So I know who I am, and I think a lot of that comes with time just to understand what kind of decks do well for you and who you are as a person. And I'd be lying if I said I sat up here and I thought I was better than 99% of players. I really don't. I don't think I am. My points may suggest that, but like I don't think I'm better than 99% of players. I just think that I've understood myself to a level to understand that I'm not better than them and that I have to kind of compensate for it in another way. So that's kind of my mentality. And it's been my mentality for a long time. And maybe we sit down here in 6 months and I have a different perspective. And I think the last few months for me have kind of opened my eyes to like, I've had a good deal of success in the last few months, specifically just from like coaching and stuff. Like that's when I kind of started getting into coaching and I'm just getting a lot more reps than I used to. And I've seen a lot of success because of it. So maybe in 6 months I sit here and I have a different perspective, but currently that's still kind of my perspective. Like if you can't beat everybody like on the same 60, then just play a 60 that beats them. Like that's kind of been my mentality.
That's really interesting because I do think like a lot of players will say, like play to your strengths. Like, or do you feel like you're like a better deck builder? Do you think you're good at sequencing or this or that? But I think you're kind of indicating also like also play like your weaknesses. Like what are you
Yeah.
not good at? What do you not have the time to do? What do you not really enjoy doing in the game? And how can you play around those weaknesses? Because most players have them. Obviously, there's some players like Azul or like an Ian Robb who they will play whatever and they will probably do well because they're just that damn good. But the average
Hmm.
and even the above average player is not there, and I don't think it's like an insult to say like most of us aren't there, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like, there's a lot of egos in the community, of course, right? There's always going to be a lot of egos. I strive and I actively try and participate in the opposite side of that. Like, I try to be as down to earth as I possibly can be, and like understand with myself, because I find that with myself, like the thing that motivates me the most is knowing that maybe I'm battling from behind. Like, this is another thing that ties into sports, so to speak. Like, even if I'm the top scorer in a league, I want the mentality that like I'm not the top scorer in the league. Like, I want the mentality that like I'm chasing something. I'm actively like behind. And like when I have that mentality in Pokemon, and I try to never let like my confidence get too high. When I have that mentality in Pokemon, I perform a lot better because I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, these guys have sweated out their lives to understand this one deck. What if I just walk in with my 10 hours of testing and give them a challenge? Like, that's a big motivation to me. And I think like even if you look at guys like Ian Robb, as you mentioned, like he's a super humble, down to earth guy. Like, there is not an ounce of ego in that guy, and it's awesome because you see that, and you see he kind of plays around his weaknesses as well. Like, I'm sure, like for guys like you and I, like we look at him, we're like, okay, I don't really see many weaknesses, but I'm sure he knows deep down, like, okay, I have this weakness, I have that weakness, and he's kind of playing around it so he's able to consistently do well because he understands himself to a high degree. So I think that's really important. I don't think it's anything wrong to admit, like, sometimes you look in the mirror and you say, hey, I'm not better than that guy. That's all good. And I think sometimes you need that.
For sure. Yeah, and sometimes like there's just like the right deck for you that like allows you to compensate for that or and sometimes we all get a little bit lucky, right? Like we've all been able to like be really good players sometimes. We have a little bit of luck on our side. There's always a bit of luck involved with the game, but you do whatever you can to kind of put yourself in that position to win. And it's a lot
Absolutely.
of it is about like identifying how do I set myself up to win.
Yeah, 100%.
Um, so in terms of like your big finishes, obviously there's like the really big finish with Miraidon at LAIC. You do also have two really big finishes with Mew. I saw you got ninth in Vancouver in 2021 or in 22. And I
Hmm.
did find out that like you bubbled out of cut unfortunately at that event.
Double ID, bubble out of cut too.
And then
Yeah.
you had 11th place at in Milwaukee last year. We've been talking about like all these like off meta picks, but then there's also Mew and a lot of really good finishes with Mew.
Hmm.
And I think the first question that comes to mind for me is that like that Vancouver finish, that ninth place. As far as I can tell, it's your first like big finish post COVID.
Yep.
What was it like, kind of getting back into the game and preparing and putting yourself in a position where you could have such big success coming back into the game?
Yeah, like pre-COVID, or my finishes aren't on Limitless, unfortunately, but I had a couple bigger ones than that for sure. And that I think set me up for success. So having that in the back of my mind, knowing I've done it before, was really helpful. I think going into Vancouver with Mew was that was my first tournament with Mew, but I had been playing it for a while. Just I had the sequencing down and stuff, and honestly, like when I look back on it, and like this is like a deeper thing, but it would have done me so much good to just even like bubble in at eighth there. Would have done me a lot of good for my mentality for sure. And I can't even imagine like and Pokemon a lot of the time is a lot of victimization for sure. It's like, oh, this didn't go my way. I wish this went my way, and people just kind of feel bad about themselves for those kinds of things. So that one as well taught me to kind of turn the page. With Mew there. Obviously, it was a meta pick. It was kind of on meta at that point. I don't think it was perceived as a BDIF, but it was definitely up there. And I just had a lot of confidence. I had a lot of confidence in my ability to play, and it's kind of counterintuitive to my point before. But I thought I was better than 99% of Mew players at that point in time, and I had that understanding of myself to know that I'd put in enough hours on the deck that I could beat people in mirror matches and stuff. And I had a really good mirror actually in my perceived winning into top eight, which obviously was not the case, but I hit Rowan Stavinow, and he's a fantastic new player. And and there was no gripe on him or no gripe on me, but I ended up being able to win that match off of like some strategy that a friend taught me like a month prior, like just something that I kind of had in the back of my mind that Rowan didn't anticipate. And Rowan is an incredible Mew player. So like just knowing that in that moment that I had a couple of lifelines and I knew that I had a couple outs if I hit a mirror and stuff gave me confidence to play that top meta pick to that big tournament. So I think that's kind of my mentality with it, and that was kind of my background with Mew, as I just felt like I had the sequencing down really well. I kind of knew the deck like the back of my hand, so I didn't mind taking a risk into mirror or taking a risk into a heavy Drapion field or whatever. And like even last year, Worlds 2023, I played Mew. I played non-fusion Mew, and I hit 6 tombs on the day. I hit 6 Spiritombs, and I got to my winning and I lost. But that was me having the confidence, like even if I hit Spiritomb, like I think I can beat it. I think I have like the outs. I think I have the experience to beat it. Whereas like recent times, like at least with Indy regionals or Orlando regionals or whatever the other ones were that I went to, like I didn't have that same confidence that I could pick up Zard and beat 99% of players. And I think that's just like a kind of a self-awareness thing that I've learned over the years to understand when you're up there and when you're not.
For sure, for sure.
So that was a big one. And I think yeah, like sorry, your question initially was how did I kind of like traverse it? I think that just understanding all the matchups with Mew and stuff and it was really important for me. And double IDing out of cut obviously sucked, but I view that relatively as a successful tournament for sure. Now obviously the standards have changed a little bit, and like I'm not sure I'd be happy with that anymore. But having that first kind of dip back in, seeing some success in that sense was really motivating for me, and it set me up really well over the next couple years to like kind of build on that confidence.
So then, as I mentioned earlier, your kind of most famous finish maybe is like the 16 at LAIC last year with kind of that like Turbo Miraidon list. People were kind of playing it a certain way, and you came in kind of with a very innovative build of the deck. You know, very heavy on the energy, very heavy on searching for your generators with Arvin, with Peony, and then that got obviously innovated later with things like just playing Peonies and Muse as your draw engine. You've mentioned a little bit about. I've heard you kind of mention a little bit about how you found this deck. You kind of stumbled across some like I think just like a Japanese player playing it. Could you
Yeah.
tell us a bit about kind of how you found this deck and what stood out to you about it when you were kind of looking at this versus kind of the more traditional builds of Miraidon?
Yeah, I didn't like it at first. I was kind of lost going into LAIC. I was at a point in my season where I had like just bombed like the last 3 events. Like it was just probably the lowest point of my modern Pokemon career for sure. I was just like I came off Worlds. I was not interested in playing the game. Like the first 3 months of the season, I just had zero interest in playing Pokemon. I was just going to travel effectively. And I was hoping that I'd be able to kind of carry myself with some skill to a finish, even though I hadn't prepared. So I learned a hard lesson at that point in time. And so going into that event, I didn't really know what I was doing. I had like a more like basic Miraidon. I also had a very, I don't even remember what the deck was, but I remember I was debating between that Miraidon and an also very like complicated deck. So I was kind of in two totally different minds. And when I saw that like turbo list with like a cajillion energies, at first I didn't like it. I thought this is terrible. But I got to a point, and it was one of my buddies who sent me the list prior, and they were kind of talking about it in the group chat, and I was like, "This is just garbage, boys. Like, what are we doing here?" And I had like tested normal Miraidon going into the event. I was in Brazil with like a buddy who didn't play Pokemon, so I wasn't testing too much prior to the event. But 2 days before, I was like, like what do I have to lose here? Like, what's the worst that can happen? Like, I think I sat down, I kind of talked myself into the idea of Iron Hands. Like, I sat there and I was like, this card is just inherently good. Like if I created my entire deck just to go through this card and give me the maximum amounts of outs to get this card online, I feel like this is the best situation that I can possibly put myself in, given that I'm completely lost otherwise. So that was kind of the idea behind it. Just knowing that I was lost, I had no idea what the hell I was doing. And at that point, it was kind of like a Hail Mary. Like, had I not done well at LAIC, I probably just chalk up my season and just say, all right, whatever. I'm just gonna save my time and money and just try again next year, maybe. Just because of how low my motivation was at that point. So that was a huge one for me, and I think in terms of like TSN turning point, that's like right up there, man. Like that was everything in terms of like where my season went, and then obviously after that it kind of blew up a little bit. I was able to kind of build my brand a little bit more, build up shift gear and stuff like that, and kind of dive into the realm of being a content creator, which is like kind of changed a lot of the way I view the game at this point. So that was huge. Yeah, just I just didn't. The answer is I didn't have a better idea. So that's how it ended up just being that decision. And obviously, I wish the cards fell a little bit better, and I was able to sneak into top 8 there. I had a really unfortunate game 3 of my win into top 8, but like I said, like I don't like victimizers, so I'm not going to victimize myself. It was a great run, and I really enjoyed it, and the deck was very niche and kind of helped me make a name for myself, so I'll always appreciate it.
For sure. And then, as you mentioned just now, like the Shift Gear podcast, like how has it been kind of getting onto like the podcasting, content creation circuit, and making a name for yourself in a bit of a different way?
Yeah, it's really new to me still. We haven't made it by any means, but like we've definitely grown a lot more than we both thought we would. We're about 8 months into the podcast. We have almost 100,000 lifetime views, listens, downloads. So it's blown up a lot faster than I ever thought it would. I think the biggest thing and our motivation behind the podcast was we had been talking about it for a long time. We're like, hey, we should like do some sort of like media outlet, like something, just because we always kind of viewed ourselves as, at least I'll speak on for myself in that sense. Like I kind of viewed myself as an outsider to the Pokemon community in a lot of ways. I was always, as I've touched on like a billion times already, and you can tell, like I've been more involved in sports, more involved in kind of like the outside of Pokemon, and I was never really too big on the content creation or any of the content in Pokemon. And still to this day, like I don't actually. This is surprising for a lot of people to hear, but I don't actually intake a lot of Pokemon content. Like when I'm done my day, I don't go on like YouTube and watch like Azul or any of that stuff. Like that's just not really my kind of thing. And the only reason it's not like I don't want to be part of this community thing. It's just I find I get tired out really fast of Pokemon, and I've learned that about myself. So creating content has helped me like get that outlet for myself, like just talk about what I want to talk about, have a platform, be able to feature others like yourself on my platform has been like the most rewarding thing ever for me because I've got to meet a lot of good people, got to really enjoy what I do, and it's been different for sure. Like I'm still not used to this whole thing, and it's been awesome, really really rewarding. I hope it just keeps continuing to grow because a lot of people, what people don't understand about podcasts, and you know this obviously as a podcaster, but there's little to no profit in podcasting alone, like zero. Uh, yeah, like
We're no Joe Rogan, right?
yeah, exactly. And like we're like Kira and I are probably like 2 grand in the hole at this point, like in terms of what we've invested and like sometimes we get guys to do our thumbnails, like we're paying for the platforms, like I'm buying freaking $30 hats every week. Like we're deep in the hole here. Like we're not making any money off this, but and I think that's the best metric in the world. Like I'm almost happy we don't make money off it because I'm able to say like this is truly a passion project. Like I am okay losing this amount of money to do this because I just genuinely enjoy having an audience, and I love being able to feature other kinds of talent. Like and for ourselves as well. Like for Kieran and I, like we were both kind of under the radar in terms of like our involvement with the Pokemon community for a long time. Like we, at least I'll speak for myself in that sense. Like I had never had any interest in kind of like going to the forefront of Pokemon and kind of like being a face. Like that was never really my thing. But as we started doing the podcast, I was like, oh, okay, I kind of like this because I'm able to share my thoughts, share my opinions, and in a way that's not really like detrimental or contradicting or anything. Like I can kind of just I have this open platform where I can kind of just chat. So that's been awesome. I had done a podcast previously. It wasn't big. It was my own little podcast. It had I don't know, maybe lifetime like 15K listens, so it wasn't big. But it was a sports podcast, so I had known everything like technically from that, and I had a lot of that background, so I was able to say like, hey, Kieran, let's just start this dude. Like I'll handle all the logistics starting out. So I think that really helped us, like kind of me understanding that side, and he has a great understanding of YouTube and kind of how the algorithms work and stuff. So it's been great. Yeah, like I think, and not to blow up this answer really long, but it's been everything I needed to kind of fall back in love with the game because I was really dwindling for a while there.
What are kind of your long term goals then for the podcast, or are you just kind of enjoying the ride?
Yeah, I don't know, man, because like we've grown so much faster than we thought we would that we haven't even had a chance to kind of like sit down and think about it. But just to continue growing. I think that's our biggest thing. We've done a lot of different kind of things. Like if you go to our channel, like you'll see there's a lot of different avenues we've kind of gone down. We've just been experimenting this last like 8 9 months to see what people really want to hear. And like there's been a lot of different things. We've done a lot of retro, we've done a lot of modern. We've done some episodes where we didn't even talk about Pokemon at all. And like I think the answer to that is like a blend of all three. Like I think we need to kind of just discover our niche. So I think that's our big thing right now is just still constantly discovering our niche, figuring out what people actually want to hear, figuring out what is missing in the space of Pokemon podcasting, which I think we've kind of figured that one out. But in terms of like what draws people in to want to listen is important to us. And not to say that views and subscribers are everything or anything like that. Like just those metrics help us understand what people actually want. So what generates views, what generates likes, what generates comments. It's like it's not even like a monetary thing for us because we're not making anything, but it's more so just a great metric to kind of understanding what people want to hear. And at the end of the day, that's our goal. As much as it's a great podcasting outlet and great like media outlet for us to showcase our thoughts and convey our thoughts in a good way, it's also like we enjoy bringing stuff to the community that isn't there already. And I think there's a lot of podcasts out there. There's a whole bunch of media. You can sit there for hours just listening to Pokemon media. But I think having a blend of like some kind of like entertaining value and some content as well. And like the number one feedback we've gotten overall is just like it's just people saying like, hey, like you dudes seem cool. Like I don't know, like I like listening to your podcast because you guys sound like the type of guys who I'd want to go for a beer with. And that's like the greatest compliment we can ever get. And so comments like that, feedback like that, like has helped us really understand what our niche is, and we're still growing. It's only like 8 months in, but long term, I think our idea is just to keep growing this thing, just keep going, and we haven't missed a week yet of episodes, which honestly is very shocking to me because I normally fall off pretty fast. So that's been it's been a good lesson to ourselves as well that we can actually kind of put our heads down and dedicate ourselves to something. So yeah, it's just been awesome, man. I have no complaints whatsoever.
I think your stuff is pretty great. I really enjoy it.
Appreciate it, man. Really appreciate it. And like that's the other thing too. Like the I think the most rewarding thing for me, aside from like meeting so many people, and like that's definitely number one for me, just meeting all the people that listen and getting to talk like even like with yourself, right? Like we wouldn't even be friends had like the podcast not really existed. So like stuff like that, it's a great success story. Like I love meeting people, and that's always been my thing. Like I'm always a big networker. I love meeting people in every facet of my life. So that's number one, and then number two, I think, is just like learning. Like when we do those videos, and when we do a blast from the past, like I would say I take like 2 or 3 hours to like learn previously about like these formats, and having the excuse to learn about them is honestly awesome because it makes me not only better as a player currently, but it makes me more knowledgeable all around. And I think having that knowledge and you never know what's going to kind of come out of it, right? Like like I said, we're not monetary. We're not making money off that, but maybe someday like we get a sponsor of like some like retro format thing just because we learned about it and we talked to some guy at a regional and we sounded like educated about it. Like there's just like the possibilities are kind of endless and none of it's like monetary in that sense. Like we're not really worried about making money off it, but it's more so just like what opportunities can this lead us into? Maybe you find something that helps your career. Maybe you find something, maybe you meet someone that's like, I don't know, can get your friend a job or something like that. So just having those networks and building those networks has been like the most important thing for us. And I think having that knowledge, growing that knowledge base, and you can never have too much knowledge, right? So I think that all that stuff has been really, really rewarding for us.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's been pretty good for you for sure.
Cannot complain.
I mean, that's how I met you. So
Yeah, yeah, and like I and like even like the podcast stuff you're doing here is like it's awesome, right? Because you never know where it's going to lead you. So I think all that is always awesome. It's always good to put out more content. And, I mean, there's no one's ever complained about more content. So
so as we start wrapping up, what events are you planning to be at? Do you have any shout outs, and where can people find you or get in touch with you?
yeah, I'll be at Worlds. That's my next event. Unfortunately, not able to make NAIC. Quite bummed out about that, but such is life. Got a wedding that weekend, so adult life does come first sometimes, I suppose. I will be at Worlds. I'll be in Hawaii. Other than that, I'm not too sure where I'll be at the start of next season. I'm basically just like everyone else, patiently waiting to hear where Worlds is before I decide whether I want to go full fledged into this or whether I can take a year off from the invite, maybe. So we'll kind of see about that. As in terms of where you can find me, yeah, if you're able to check out the Shift Gear podcast, that'd be awesome. We're still growing. We need some subs for sure. So if you don't mind subscribing to the Shift Gear podcast, that's always appreciated. You can find me on Twitter at tcg_Aneil, and happy to always bounce ideas off people if anyone needs some input or anything like that going to NAIC. I also coach on the side. I'm slowly starting to get too many clients where I don't know what to do with it, but it's a good problem to have, so I cannot complain. Honestly, it's become very hard to balance, so I might need to scale back a little bit. But if you're looking for any coaching, I am available there at all times, and I do really enjoy that part. And like, as I touched on earlier, I feel like it makes me a better Pokemon player. So I probably should continue to do it. So I will try my best to continue to do it. But other than that, no real shout outs. Thank you so much for having me on, man. It's always nice to have like another outlet other than Shift here to kind of just talk about life and talk about me, so this has been a real treat for me. So I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. It's been a pleasure.
For sure.
Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you to Aneil for being so generous with his time. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. If you're interested in hearing more conversations like this one, please consider giving the podcast a follow, review, or rating wherever you're listening. If you want to follow us on social media, you can follow the podcast on Twitter at memcappodcast. Or if you want to see me post about my own TCG experiences, you can follow me on Twitter at RZGladys. Hope you have a great day, and thank you for listening.